Mark Bryceland, welcome to the Development by David podcast. How are you, mate?
I'm good, man. Just working away in the off season right now, and kind of just enjoying my time to myself because usually I'm quite a busy man, but right now I've got a lot of free time, so enjoying myself. That's why I'm here today to talk to you.
Awesome. I can't wait to get into that busy schedule. Can you tell me where you're dialing in from just now?
Yeah, I'm currently back in Glasgow. I've been away living in Los Angeles for the last 9 months, but it's the off season now, so I typically use this time to come home and spend time with my friends and family and whatnot. So, because we're obviously working in terms of I mean, we'll get into that, what I do exactly, I'm sure, down the line, but the way my work is, it's very seasonal, like a traditional sports season. So during like a 3-4 month period, we can have a bit of downtime. We still have preparation going on for next year, but we obviously have more time to ourselves and whatnot and working on it ourselves.
I feel like we're already teasing the listener of what you do, who you are. So if I were to ask who is Mark Bryceland today in 2023, how would you bring that to life, mate?
Yeah, I'm Mark Bryceland, and I'm the head coach of the LA Guerillas, who are in the Call of Duty League. I've been doing this for quite some time now at this point, but uh, most recently last year moved over to Los Angeles Guerillas, and I've been there for a year. So now going into my second year with them. So that's me in 2023.
Awesome, mate. Let's take it back to the beginning. Where or when did you pick up gaming? What was your first console? What was your first game? Do you remember picking it up for the first time?
Yeah, no, I definitely do. Still quite a vivid memory of mine. I think the very first thing I ever played was Pokemon, and I can still remember playing it on the old Game Boy, like the old grey one, the original. And I think that that's kind of what got me right into it. And then growing up, obviously playing a bunch of different things, FIFA with my friends, games like Halo, and all that sort of stuff. Then eventually get into Call of Duty. But that's kind of where I got started. Is just kind of playing those more like casual games, I guess you could say, growing up, and obviously that's kind of where I got hooked.
Do you remember at what point it became more prominent in your life where you were spending more time behind the screen and in front of the console?
Um, hmm. I think it was probably around like 2011, 2012, around that period of time is when I first like started getting into the, truly competitive stuff, and like attending events and all those sort of things and spending a lot more time playing and practicing. Before that, it was more so like I was in school, so it was sort of, in the evenings and whatnot, a couple hours here and there. But then around that time is kind of where I made it like more of a full-time thing. So since then I've been kind of going strong. So it's quite a while now. I've been doing this almost half my life at this point. So uh, yeah, it's been quite some time.
I don't mean to ask such a silly and juvenile question, but some of the listeners might not be familiar with it at all, which I'll be surprised about. But if you were to bring to life what is Call of Duty in a nutshell, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean the game Call of Duty is obviously like a kind of military simulator shooter kind of thing, and it's obviously nothing like real life. But when I first got into Call of Duty, it was on Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, sorry, and that was obviously kind of based on current times, but recent Call of Duty titles, you've got, futuristic, where they're kind of inventing what's going on in the future and potentially what like that advanced warfare is going to look like. And then obviously you've got the kind of older style games where you've got like the World War II themed ones, etc. But it's all kind of the same. You're playing against other people across the world, and obviously trying to win matches.
A quick question on how the kind of plot and storyline of Call of Duty has changed over the years. Do you think it's been a deliberate move to move between like modern warfare that reflects events that are going on in the news, perhaps, or have just went by in the news, and a transition towards advanced warfare in order to not glamorize and fetishize warfare or army or military or conflict? Do you think that's been a deliberate move, or do you think it's just natural advancements of the game that have
I
caused that?
don't think it's a deliberate move to for that reason. I think it's more so that they release a new Call of Duty game every year, and if they were releasing a current generation of what military is like, every single year, I think the sales would obviously drop. They're constantly trying to like change up the kind of landscape of where the game is set, just to keep things fresh. So you'll never really see kind of back-to-back Call of Duty games that are typically from the same era. But the new Call of Duty has been announced, Modern Warfare 3, so we're actually getting that this year. So uh, typically they like to change up the kind of time frame that it's based in every now and then. But this year they're kind of going back to back with the same thing.
I don't want to get into this question already, but I think it's a fitting time to ask it. Do you think, like, I was doing some like light browsing on the internet before starting this podcast, and I googled something like, "What effects do Call of Duty have on kids?" And it was like reduced social skills, um, high proclivity to be violent, easily distracted. But then I look at you, and I'm sure we'll get into like how illustrious and crazy your career has been and how rewarding it has been. Do you think some of those grand sweeping statements on the internet are true?
Definitely not. I think that you know, some of the people I've met through these, Call of Duty competitions that I've been going to, like I said, since 2011, not really met anyone that's particularly violent. I think that that's one of those things that's like, it's obviously a very controversial topic, but I think that at the end of the day, there's so many million people that play Call of Duty as a game, and just by the numbers, there's probably going to be one or two people there that are not really right. And I think that those are the ones that are typically, going to maybe fall more into the violent side of things. But personally, for me, I don't think that that's been a behavior that I've seen being displayed by, a lot of my peers and people that I've, met throughout the years of, which is thousands of people, of course. And I think that at the end of the day, that's just one of those things that there's always going to be, every generation, there's always something that gets blamed for violence, whatnot. I mean, during the, 80s, 90s, I'm sure it was like rock music, and things like that. And there's always just a new thing to blame. So for me, I think that it's on everyone else, to be honest, to actually take accountability for their own actions. And I think that a lot of the time it's just down to the individual themselves rather than the game. I don't think people are playing Call of Duty and going, "Oh, I want to go into war now." I don't think that's the reality.
Oh, me neither, mate. And I think it's an interesting point because if I was to look at football, for example, I could imagine per 100,000 there are way more violent football fans or footballers than there is Call of Duty players per 100,000. Yet you've never heard football be described as a driver for violence or playing football as a driver for violence. I think these grand sweeping generalizations have been pointed towards Call of Duty just because there is guns in it and there is death in it and there's explosions in it. It just
Yeah.
seems like the easiest thing to tag it to. But like I said, I think there are probably way more violent people playing football than there are playing Call of Duty.
Yeah, and like you witness these things in films too. There's obviously very graphic things that happen in a lot of films nowadays, and it doesn't, make you want to kind of take up that life that you're. It's an art form at the end of the day, and it's something that you enjoy. It's not more so something that you want to do in your spare time.
So when did Call of Duty as a singular game really stick for you opposed to playing FIFA or Super
Yeah,
Smash Bros, for example? Why Call of Duty and when?
around 2008, 2009, I'd say. That was, I remember Call of Duty games by the year. I'm a bit of a nerd, but around Call of Duty 4 and Call of Duty World at War, which were the two games back to back, that's kind of really when I got right into it. Playing with my friends from school, we'd all be playing in sort of like online competitive matches and stuff like that. And that really was what propelled me into where I am today. But that's really when we got into it, and we'd go into school Monday to Friday, and then it would be like, "Oh, see you online at 5 o'clock, and we'll get into some COD." And then during the day at lunchtime and all that, we'd be talking about our matches from the night before. We were quite sweaty. So yeah, I think those are the times I kind of like got right into it, and like I said, with my friends. And at that time, some of them were actually better than me. Just so happened that a lot of them along the way kind of gave up with it. But for whatever reason, I just decided to stick in at it, and obviously worked out in the end. But it wasn't with trials and tribulations throughout it.
What was the transformation from hobby to professional like? What's the kind of roadmap for something like that? Like, the only kind of sport I can compare it to is football, whereby you'd be playing a game, there'd be a scout, and they'd sign you up for Man United juniors or Celtic juniors, and you start going and training with those boys. Is it a same kind of environment for Call of Duty, or is it very different?
It's changed a lot since when I first got back into it, or when I first got into it, sorry. I think that at the time you could attend events when you were like under 18 and stuff like that because they weren't sanctioned by Activision themselves. So you'd have to sign like you'd have to get your parents to sign like a permission slip type thing when you were under 18. But you didn't have to. Nowadays, you can't compete at these tournaments until you're 18 years old because it goes off of the rating of the game itself. So it's changed a lot since my time. In my day, like when I first got into it, it was very much like everyone, even the best players in the world and the lowest level of players, all played on a website called gamebattles.com. So you could be playing with your mates and then match up against the best player in the world. Nowadays, it's not as accessible as that, to be honest with you. You can't. Nowadays, it's all the professional teams like practicing against one another and stuff like that. So it's harder for a young player now to get noticed, especially being under 18. You're not really getting those opportunities. But nowadays, I'd say the kind of best roadmap I'd give for competing in these online competitions is obviously just when you're the underage of 18, just playing COD with your friends and just enjoying it. And I think that that's the most important thing at the end of the day. I think that when you enjoy something, you put a lot of time into it. It's natural that you're just going to improve and improve through time. And then when that opportunity arises, when you turn 18, then you can start going to all these different competitions, entering the online competitions, which are kind of like, I guess, the step one. You don't just kind of turn 18 and then just start going to events straight away. It's most of the time you're competing in a lot of these online competitions on the same website, gamebattles.com, that I mentioned, which has been about since like 2004 or something. So, yeah, that's kind of where you start. You progress from there. You start getting sort of improved teammates. You kind of move yourself up the ladder, and then you start attending events. Right now, the way the COD ecosystem works is there's the Call of Duty League itself, and then beneath that is almost like the championship, which is called Challengers. So the COD League is the top 12 teams. That's the franchise league. You have to pay to get in it. Challengers, there's no like barrier for entry in terms of like having to pay to get in or anything like that. So Challengers is like where you just if you have this console or a PC or whatever, and you've got a team, you can play and compete in challengers and try and progress up the rankings. It's like a big leaderboard. You get placements based on essentially like where you place in these different competitions. So you'll get things called pro points, which essentially put you up the ladder. And allow you to qualify for the big tournaments because even in challengers you have like a world championship at the end of the year, which is worth quite a lot of money as well. It's I think like 250 to half a million prize pool for the amateur challengers, and then there's different tournaments throughout the year that obviously you can get into to winning prize money there as well. So there's ample opportunity. The unfortunate thing is there's only 12 teams in the league, only 4 players in each team, so 48 players total. So even making it to the top of challengers, you're within like the top 100 players in the world, which is still quite a considerable achievement considering the amount of millions of people that play Call of Duty. So for me, I think that that's the kind of roadmap I'd give. But again, it's a little more complicated now than it was back in when I first started getting into it because I could just play against the best players in the world like straight away, and obviously that gives you an opportunity to improve at a faster rate. If you could just go play football with Messi every day, I'm sure you'd become class. You know what I mean? And I think that that's what's different nowadays. Unfortunately, the laws in terms of the ratings of the games and whatnot are just kind of hard to get by.
What's your overall opinion on that? Because I can imagine if you are like a 14, 15-year-old, 16-year-old prodigy who is destined to play at the big leagues, just phenomenal potential, phenomenal talent, and phenomenal aptitude. By the time you get to 18, like most young men and young people's kind of sliding door moments are at that age where they're choosing like what trade do I pick, what university do I
Yeah,
pick, do I go to college? And they're probably more pressurized at that age to make a sensible decision. Sorry, in inverted commas, sensible decision. So I can imagine they're kind of more paralyzed by that choice. Whereas if you're 14 and 15 and you are almost one of the best in the world, your parents are going to probably be a bit more supportive, perhaps, for you to go down that route. So do you think there's a lot of wasted talent because we're waiting till like the age of 18 to fully accept that talent into competitions?
Oh yeah, 100%. And like I said before, they brought in the kind of 18-year-old rule when you used to have there was some players that were, finishing top three events that were like 14, 15. There is a lot of young talent at that age. It's just unfortunate. But yeah, 100% I agree that there's a lot of missing talent out there. And like you said, it's a very tough situation when you're 18 years old and you could be going to, university, college, whatever that may be at that age, finishing high school. I mean, it's a very weird age to kind of have to wait for. Like I said, when I got into it, I think my first event I was 16, maybe 17. So like I had a few years of where I was still in school and stuff like that, where I could actually like get to a point where I felt comfortable making that decision. Whereas now, unless you're, that next up prodigy, like you're the top three 17-year-olds, you're really not getting that many opportunities. And speaking from experience of this as well, we had a player that had just turned 18 in our team last year, and he ended up being unbelievable. And I think that he was one of those ones that was like at the age of 14 to 18 was maybe not in any competitions, but was getting opportunities in like practice sessions. If a top team like was missing out on a player for that one particular reason, he would kind of slide in there and help out, be like more of like a pickup type player. And that gave him opportunities when it came down to turning 18. And then he was in one of the top challengers teams in our academy team. And they won the very first tournament he attended. So his very first event he's ever attended, he won it. And then we brought him into our starting roster right after that. So obviously there are kind of dreamboat scenarios where it can work out well for you, but at the end of the day, for most of the players that are coming into the league now, a lot of them kind of need to wait until they're like 19, 20 before they actually get the opportunity because they need to be 18 before they can compete in challengers, and then usually they need like a year, maybe 2 years in challengers before one of these pro teams actually takes the gamble on them.
It's ridiculous, mate, considering that despite the age rating being 18 plus, for example, kids are still gonna play the game. The
Yeah.
the same amount of kids are always gonna be playing those games, and it's just such a wasted, pool of talent and potential. One thing that I was smiling at there, just an intrusive thought that I had is, I'm not sure if you've ever been down the boozer with your mates, right? And you speak to one of the lads, and they're like, "Yeah, I played for Celtic Youth. I could have went pro, but I snapped my knee," for example. And they're talking bullshit. I wonder how many people are using that 18 rule and saying, "Oh, I could have went pro at COD, but I had to wait till I was 18, so I never turned pro."
Yeah, no, 100%. There's definitely a lot of people that are in that situation realistically. I think that it's one of those ones as well. Like it could be depending on your individual situation. If you are maybe in a comfortable, you're 18 years old, maybe there's obviously people that come from a lot of money and things like that. They might be more comfortable to make a decision to like, maybe take a year off school or something along those lines to commit to doing it full time. But again, for a lot of these young people, it's kind of and I'd even say this myself, not a really sensible decision. It's a complete gamble. So I think that it's one of those things. It's hard. It is hard, but it's just unfortunately the rules we play with.
What was your transition after school? What did you do when she left high
So
school?
I kind of left school and moved straight into being a pro Call of Duty player. I got offered like a professional contract to be paid right when I turned 18 or maybe just before that. So for me it was kind of like a straight transition from I never done like any secondary education at all. So for me it was kind of like transitioning from high school straight into being a Call of Duty professional. And then obviously Call of Duty coach now. So it's been quite a long period of time I've been doing this for at this stage, over 10 years professionally.
Your mates must have been so jealous. Imagine leaving school into like becoming a mechanic or a joiner or like I'm not lambasting these trades, like all my best
Oh
mates
yeah.
have them, but they're going out in the pissing rain and you're like, "Yeah, I'm leaving to go play Call of Duty full time." They must have been raging at you.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm definitely like blessed in that regard. I think there's pros and cons. Like at the end of the day, like you said, um, some people would prefer not to be spending 6, 7 days a week just on a PC 24/7. So I think it's obviously on the individual themselves and what they want from life. But for me, I think that obviously I feel very blessed to be able to do this because it's something I'm obviously very passionate about. So for me, obviously I feel fantastic.
And of course, that doesn't discredit what you're doing. Like, it's not like you were just playing games for fun, like 8 hours a day. You were still working. You were still like having
Yeah.
to put in. a graft, a very different graft, but still a graft. And like you said, you're behind a screen 8 hours a day, where perhaps some of your mates who do have trades are out and about socializing in person with people, whereas you're like having to like train and perform at a high caliber behind the screen every single day. So perhaps, like you said, they wouldn't actually have traded their own life for yours.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that a lot of people would, but at the end of the day, I think that there was obviously a lot of sacrifices along the way that a lot of people don't see. Um, the likes of, not getting to socialize as much on weekends because a lot of these competitions would take place on the weekends. So Saturdays and Sundays and stuff I would usually be quite busy. So it meant that obviously when you turn 18, that people are, sort of doing things throughout the week. So for me, uh, not being able to socialize did kind of suck a lot. But uh, you know, whenever I did get the opportunity to, I was definitely out there and doing things with my friends. That's one thing I've definitely made a conscious effort of doing throughout the entirety of my career, and I think that that's one thing that a lot of players don't do, even in the pro level now, is like take a step away from it. And when you do have that free time, make sure you use it. You need a bit of like work-life balance at the end of the day. And I think that's one of the big issues with burnout and stuff like that that you get in the Call of Duty scene, where you have these guys that are waking up, getting on the game, going to sleep, waking up, doing the same thing every single day. And obviously, some of them are becoming phenomenal Call of Duty players from it. But at the same time, some of them are going down the opposite route where it's making them worse and worse. So it's about just knowing yourself, what you need as an individual to succeed. And I've worked with a variety of different players, as my time at coaching and playing. And there's some guys that do need to put in a lot of time to be at their very best. But then there's some guys that think they do because they see that other guy doing that, and then they commit in that amount of time, and it's actually making them a worse of a player. So it's very important that these guys sort of recognize for themselves what they need to be at their very best, and some guys need to take some time away from it and actually just work on themselves outside of that.
You kind of touched on there around what ingredients make a Call of Duty player a good Call of Duty player. If I were to ask you what skills, attitudes, and aptitudes does a professional Call of Duty player need, how would you answer that?
I'd say number one is probably communication. It's a team game that's 4 versus 4, so being able to communicate effectively with your teammates is incredibly important. Number two is discipline. I think that obviously you've got to be, we come up with these game plans and strategies to win games, and if you maybe go off the plan, if you're doing your own thing, sometimes you can. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes these plays can win you a game at the same time, maybe going a little bit off the beaten path, but uh, a lot of the time you got to stick to what you know and just try and work as a team to secure victories. So I think discipline's a big part of it as well. Um, I mean, outside of that, I think that obviously you've got these players that are just got this incredible individual ability, uh, and a lot of that comes down to pure intelligence and obviously just putting in a good amount of time into the game. You see these sort of flashy players that can make situations unfold where maybe their team's about to lose a game and they do something crazy and win their team a game. I think that that's obviously a big part of it too. Um, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a bunch of different variables that I think come into the sort of complete picture of a Call of Duty player, but I think that each player as well plays their own role, so you don't necessarily have to all have each skill, if that makes sense. I think as long as your team as a collective has the right mixture of players, the right mixture of personalities, I think your team's going to succeed. You can't all just be kind of like standardized robots where you're all the same.
What I like about that is that it almost mirrors, for example, the closest thing that some of the listeners might relate to is football. Like you wouldn't want like 11 strikers on the pitch or 11 goalkeepers on the pitch. You, like you said, you need this hybrid approach of different positions doing different things with different roles and responsibilities with ultimately different personalities. I really like that. Much like sports or athleticism, do you get any like genetic freaks in esports? For example, in basketball, someone who's incredibly tall, or someone in boxing with a really long wingspan who's got a really good reach. Do you have the same in esports? Like, I don't know, really good vision or really good, I don't know, like the size and shape of their thumbs. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's more so from like a physical perspective, but there's definitely players that like, you have the players that are incredibly intelligent, the players that are great at communicating, the players who are just individually extremely talented to the point where maybe their other skills like communication and all these other factors are at a lower level than a lot of the players, but they make up for it somewhere else. So I wouldn't really say from like a physical perspective, but definitely say from like a player archetype perspective. And that's just going back into like the last thing I said as well about like different roles in Call of Duty. There is multiple different roles, and like different sort of players need to play these specific roles. So you have like a main AR player who's the kind of like backbone of the team, and he's usually going to be like the vocal leader in the squad. And then you have like a flex player who's like it makes sense flexible. So he's kind of doing both roles where he maybe he can play really fast at some stages, but then he also slows down to more of the pace of the main AR player. Then you have the two SMG players who kind of work in tandem where they are maybe one of them's doing the dirty work. If you've played Call of Duty, maybe he's the guy that's getting on the objective, while the other guys focus more on like controlling the map and getting the kills in front of him to allow your team to rack up points to win. Um, for people that haven't played Call of Duty, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But for those who have, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Um, so yeah, there's obviously different skill sets for different players and different roles.
What was your role, mate?
I was a main AR player, so I was like the vocal backline for the team. I'm going to be the guy that's shouting communication, allowing maybe the flex player to like take more of a back seat on that, but focus more on getting kills on the map and stuff like that, which is obviously key to success. You need, like I said, a well balanced team. So for me, I'd do a lot of the dirty work. I'd be kind of the guy sitting on the objective a lot of the time, and just trying to make my team win. I was the kind of guy that filled in the gaps and just did whatever it takes to win.
Do you remember what your first pay was like from playing Call of Duty?
Um, yeah, my first pro event, I came second and I won 2.5 grand, I think. But the prize money's changed a lot since those days. But yeah, my first pro event, I won 2.5 grand. Uh,
How much
After
would that be
that,
now?
if you win
If
events
it
now,
was in
it's like
competition?
if you win an event now, it's 50 grand each, I think. Yeah, 50 grand each. That's just for a standard event. Then the World Championships, like it varies year on year, but it's went from like 200 to 400,000 per player, depending on the year. And there's been different sort of prize winnings for World Championships over the years.
How old were you when you got that second place?
Uh, 18. Yeah, I just came back off my 6th year holiday. I was in Malia. Uh, and I went straight to the tournament the next weekend and came second. We actually could have won and would have been 5 grand, which would have been better. But we actually threw the final, believe it or not. So it was
Definitely
kind
your
of
fault for being in Malia the week before.
I played unbelievable. It was one of my best events, funnily enough. My very first event as a pro player was one of my best to this day. I mean, obviously to this day, I'm not a player anymore. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun time. Obviously, I had a great tan at the event. Put it that way.
Mate, that's mental. That must have been such like a good business case or use case to go to your parents, to go to like the career advisors at school, to go to the people around you, being like, "Yeah, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. I just played one tournament and I've got 2.5 grand. That's taken you a whole month to make." Did you ever use that credibility almost or financial credibility to prove your career decision?
Not really to like anyone apart from my family. Just to kind of justify it to them, I'd say that from I didn't really care about what anyone else thought, to be honest with you. So for me, it was more so just from my family's perspective, for sure. And winning that money at my very first event allowed me to do a lot of other things. So like around that time, I bought a PC so I could start streaming on Twitch, earning more money there. So it was like I won money, but I reinvested it into myself to then actually make more money at that age. So that was a smart decision for me, obviously at the time.
My mate, who is also an ex-professional Call of Duty player, asked me to ask about TCM Marky B BenQ. What does that mean?
That was just our gamer tag back around those times that I'm talking about. Kind of when I first won my first event, I was at a team called TCM, and we were sponsored by the monitor company called BenQ. So, yeah, funnily enough, actually, we didn't even get BenQs from the company, but they just paid our salaries essentially uh, to TCM, which they then paid into our bank accounts. But at the time, it was as if we were obviously sponsored by a monitor company, which we were, but we just had them on our jerseys and stuff. We didn't actually get free monitors. Funny story, but yeah.
So tell me about the career progression after that. Like, how did you go from winning 2.5 grand to, yeah, playing in some of the biggest teams in the biggest league in the world?
Um, well, yeah, from that point, I just kind of remained around the top in Europe for quite some time. Like I won about, I think it's 7 or 8 European titles. Obviously around those times the prize money wasn't as big, but still was obviously able to like live off of it and whatnot. Still living at home, and I was winning a lot of online tournaments as well. So I was around the in the top 1 or 2 teams in Europe for probably like 5 years. And then around 2017, 2018, I started to have a little bit of a fall off, I'd say. Not individually, just my results weren't coming, wasn't doing as well. Didn't qualify for the Pro League in 2018 because at this stage it wasn't like a franchise league where you had to pay to get in. It was 2 seasons where you had to qualify through like a kind of almost like what they have in the championship to the SPL now, where you have to like play that playoff kind of match where you play against a team that was already in the league. In both seasons that year, I lost in the very final match to qualify. So I think for me that was like at a point where I wasn't obviously earning as much money because I wasn't winning tournaments, wasn't doing as well. So that's when I made the decision in 2018 to make the transition into becoming a coach because I'd heard rumors about the franchise league coming in, and I joined a team that already had. So to explain things deeper, Activision has 2 games that they have franchise leagues when they have Call of Duty, then they have Overwatch. The Overwatch League started prior to the Call of Duty League, so in 2018 the Overwatch League had already started, and the company that I had an opportunity to coach with had an Overwatch League team, which basically implied that we were also going to be joining the Call of Duty League. So for me, it was a sensible choice to join them, even though there was another team that was offering me more money and were actually a better team at the time. I joined the team that I obviously knew had a better sort of career progression with, and that was a company called Splice, who owned the Toronto Ultra Spot eventually, and then that's where I moved to Toronto in 2019, towards the end of it. So was in Toronto for 3 years, 4 years, yeah, 4 years, um, until no, sorry. Wait, my math's off. 3 years. I was in Toronto for 3 years, living there, and then eventually moved to Los Angeles last year. So, I've been obviously doing competing for a number of years, and then since 2018, I've been a coach. So, last 5 years been coaching.
Before we touch on your coaching career, what was the pinnacle or kind of highest point that you got to with your playing career?
Yeah, I mean, I never won like a major, like international event. Like I said, I won like 7, 8 European tournaments. I got to the finals of a bunch of international tournaments. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get over the line, so I didn't win anyone. But I'd say that's probably the pinnacle. For me, I think getting second at an international event is more impressive than winning a European event because most of the time, especially in my sort of career, the American teams were dominating the European teams a lot of the time. I was actually a part. No EU team had placed above top 8 at a tournament going into 2013, 2014 times. And I was part of the team that broke that sort of curse, it was called at the time, and progressed forward to top 3. Nowadays, obviously, there's a lot of European players in the league, and there's a lot more success from European players. You've had a bunch of different teams from Europe that have won different tournaments. So, uh, the I'd like to think that I've helped pave the way for those people. But again, not taking any credit away from them because they were definitely far better than me, to be honest with you.
So would you reckon that you're a better coach than your player? Or because you've been such a good player, allowed you to be such a good coach or even better coach?
I don't know. It's hard to judge. Like you can't. It's hard to compare. They're two different things completely. Um, I'd say I've had more success as a coach, just you know, from winning standpoint. I've won a couple of international events as a coach. So in comparison to as a player, obviously I never won an international event. So I'd definitely say, results wise, I've definitely done better as a coach.
I was so naive when researching this kind of esports and Call of Duty world. I was so naive to think that a team would have a coach. I thought it was just like how you would play at home. There'd be four guys or four girls, and you'd all play together just like you would at home. I didn't realize it'd be like a managerial figure that would kind of coordinate the team or be like a reporting line for the team. Like, what are your main roles and responsibilities as a coach?
Yeah. Before I go into that, I'm just going to give you a bit more context. So there's not only just me within like the company that I work for, which is Tronky Sports Entertainment. So like my boss is Stan Kroenke up there somewhere, who obviously owns Arsenal, LA Rams, and the NFL, Denver Nuggets, and the NBA. So there's a lot of different positions between him and me. We've got a general manager. We've got alongside me. I have a data analyst, an assistant coach, and all these sort of things. So like it's not just me and four players. And then you obviously have from the business side. You have like marketing teams. You have like the people who create content and all these sort of things. So there's a lot of staff. You know, the last two companies I've worked for have probably had between 50 and 80, 50 and 80 staff at different times. So
What?
yeah, so there's definitely a lot of more pieces involved. But yeah, in terms of roles and responsibilities, I'll start from the kind of the off season period. So in the off season, it's more so like preparing for the next year, signing players like you would in a football management situation. It's kind of like the transfer window right now, where you have, your, players are getting bought and sold by other franchises. You're dealing with contracts and all these sort of things, and putting the pieces together with those roles that I was talking about earlier in terms of like the different positions in the team, and you're obviously mapping it all out. And then once you obviously have all that figured out, you have to, you know, sort of set expectations for the team going into the year. And then the season starts when the game comes out. So when the new Call of Duty game comes out, I think it's November 11th, then there'll probably be a couple days around that time where the players kind of just get to grips with the game. You're not really going in day one and being like, right, let's get a practice session going. It's more so, obviously, unlike traditional sports where it's just the same game they're playing throughout their entire careers. Call of Duty changes year by year, and although it's very similar each year, there's obviously some slight differences. So the first couple of days to a week of the game are like just everyone getting to grips with it and essentially just playing the game, and that'll be what I'll be doing as well. Of course, just trying to get a leg up on your competition, trying to figure out the little nuances of the game ahead of other people, so that when the league starts, you have a like slight advantage. And then in terms of like practice sessions and whatnot, the way my sort of daily routine would work would be we'd usually come into the facility because we have like a facility out in Los Angeles that we all play from together. Usually I'd come into the facility about 9, half 9 in the morning, um, and then we'd have, depending on the day, it would be between an hour and 30 minutes to an hour of like video review and the like setting sort of goals we have for that day. And because obviously we're playing a variety. If you've never played Call of Duty before, you're playing a variety of different maps and stuff and game mode combinations. So you kind of need to like have a game plan of something you want to improve on each of those, so that when you're doing it in practice, you obviously have some goals to work off of. And then after practice, which is usually around 6 hours, then we'll usually have some sort of small VOD review. It's usually looking at more individual stuff. The start of the day, I'd say, is more focused on like team um, sort of VOD review, and then I'll work more one to one with the players after practice.
What's a
Uh,
VOD review?
so a VOD review is essentially like watching back the matches you've played. So say you've just played a 90 minutes of football. After it, or maybe the next morning, a manager might have the players come in and being like and pointing out different mistakes or pointing out things that they did really well. It's very much similar to that, where you're kind of just reviewing the sort of game you've played prior, or practice session, or whatever that may be.
That's awesome, man. That is awesome. I didn't realize how like detailed and strategic this was. Like I've just been so naive to the whole industry because I don't know what I don't know, and now like learning from
Yeah.
you, I realize how like intricate it is. Given that you said that communication was such a huge component of what makes a team successful and what makes a good Call of Duty player successful, given that now that you're in Scotland, I know it's temporary. how important is it for you to spend over the shoulder time and team bonding time with your team, not only in practice playing games, but also out with the environment of gaming, out with the facility? Much like how if you work for an organization, you work in a corporate world in a 9 to 5, there may be a social event in the evening, or you may do a gym class together or something like that. How important is that for yeah, playtime?
I'm glad you asked that because I actually failed to mention how important that is because that's a big part of my philosophy as a coach is actually building that team culture up outside of the game because I think that that's what a lot of teams do is where outside of their practice time together, a lot of them will kind of go their own separate ways and whatnot. I think that when it comes down to those crunch moments in games where it's neck and neck and you have to make that big game win decision, that trust that you build with your teammates is massively important. I think that building that outside of the game is very key. I'd say last year, to be completely transparent, I don't think I'd done as good of a job as I did previously in Toronto. I think in Toronto, with the team we had very much like a kind of brotherhood, where everyone, it wasn't really like a forced thing where I was like, yeah, guys, let's go do this after practice together. Let's go on a team walk. That was quite like a regular thing for us prior to matches. The night before, we'd go a big walk around Toronto as a team. And it just kind of allowed us to sort of set like everyone get off their chest what they wanted to do the next day and like make sure everyone's aligned on the game plan and stuff like that, while also being in a more kind of casual setting. And Toronto, if you've ever been there, is like quite a lovely city to walk around, especially at night. So it just was a good combination for us. We just kind of walked around a lot of the time. It got to a point where we would like we had a serious issue with walking. Like we'd go out for a dinner like an hour and a half walk away, and we'd be like, "Do you want to walk up the road?" And we'd be like, "Yep, let's walk up the road." So uh, like we became walking addicts. It became a point where every night there was like an hour walk, especially during like COVID times where we couldn't go into, no one could go into each other's like apartments and stuff like that. Obviously, so um, a lot of it was spent just going on late night walks together for like an hour. So
There
I
you
think
go, and
that's
people say gamers are lazy, and you guys are getting more steps in than probably most fitness fanatics, never mind the general population in that case.
I was preaching the 10K steps a day. I was preaching it. And to be fair, a lot of them were very active and going to gym and stuff out with that. Some of them weren't, but don't get me wrong, pretty much all of them always got a good amount of steps in. But I definitely think that's another part that some gamers really sort of don't put a big emphasis on is like health and well-being and stuff like that. And I think there are a lot more sort of people out there that are preaching the benefits of it. So I think that a lot of players now are starting to, take up whatever they may feel like, whether that be running, going to the gym and weightlifting, doing something else. A lot of players have kind of delved more into the health and well-being side of things recently, and I think that that's big for the industry, to be honest, because I think it helps prolong these players' careers. Because, like I said, I quit playing when I was 24, 23. So I'm 28 now. So, you know, 23, 24 to be retired as a professional was quite young. And to be honest with you, I wasn't in my best physical shape then in comparison to when I first started competing when I came out of school. So I think that that was definitely a part to play in it in terms of my mental well-being. I would really say there's physical benefits to getting fit for when it comes to Call of Duty because obviously you're not doing anything physical, you're twiddling your thumbs. But I think the mental aspect of being, fit is the most important thing for these guys. Because I think at the end of the day, if you're doing something to progress your life somewhere, your whole happiness isn't going to be based on the results of how your practices went that day or how your results as a team have went that day. If you're still progressing as a human being, I think that you're obviously going to be in a more happy mindset.
Oh, I like that. I really like that. The ability for one of your teammates or one of your players to not solely put their entire happiness on the outcome of their practice rounds or their mock
Yeah,
games, but in other dopamine and serotonin releasing activities throughout the day. And I can imagine people always talk about the endorphins you get from working out, going a walk, being in sunlight, all these good things. I can imagine, like you said, the psychological and mental effects of doing these things have a indirect effect on how you perform, and manage stresses, manage difficult conversations, manage difficult scenarios in the games as well. I wanted to ask on that point actually, the parallel between gaming and mental performance techniques. So like, have you ever had to use like meditation and mindfulness and stress reducing techniques for your team or as a player personally in order to optimize your gaming performance?
Yeah, as a player, I wasn't really, like I said before, I didn't really take care of myself. And that's why I, preach a lot of these things nowadays. But as a coach, our teams have always kind of like been very, very into like deep breathing. So this was in our Toronto times. One of my assistant coach at the time, Ryan, he was right into Wim Hof, if you know who that is.
Yeah, yeah, I do Wim
So
Hof every
we
morning.
Oh, well, there you go. So we would do like Wim Hof breathing exercises before matches, and we'd all kind of just lie down on the floor together and do like a deep breathing session, and that seemed to work wonders for our team. To be honest, it really calmed us down, especially going into those like intense moments when you're playing on stage. There's a live crowd and all that thing. I think it's very important to be able to lower your heart rate and really calm yourself down. And some players even done different like breathing techniques like 4-7-8s, where you're kind of inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 7 seconds, and exhaling for 8 seconds while they were on stage in between maps, just to again, if it was like a very intense map and they've just won it or they've just lost it, just to calm themselves down and reset. But again, a lot of players try different things. I've had players that have ice baths every day. There's obviously like a variety of different techniques and stuff like that. But I think it's obviously on the individual to find what works for them.
And I can imagine there's probably some anomalies to that rule, kind of like a John Jones in the UFC or a George Best or a Gaz in the football who go out and party all the time, sleep 4 hours a night, eat like rubbish, and then go on and still be like one of the best players on the match.
Yeah, there is. There's players that I've seen that like, there's obviously those players that are very disciplined, and then there's the other players who you'll see on a game day eating at McDonald's, and you'll be like, "What are you doing?" And then he comes into the game and just does the best out of everyone in the entire game. So don't get me wrong, there's always anomalies in every sport, and I'm sure that there will continue to be. But the way I think about it is there's no disadvantage, in my opinion, to living a more healthy lifestyle. There's only a disadvantage to living a less healthy lifestyle. You know what I mean? Like maybe you'd get less enjoyment out of eating healthy food. Maybe I'll give you that. But at the end of the day, I think that there's no disadvantage, in my opinion, to actually just living a more healthy life. So I still think that these anomalies would form the same, if not better, if they were looking after themselves. Just because they're an incredible individual talent, I think it's going to prolong your career and all these other effects that it can potentially have. Because at the end of the day, you can only sustain that. Your body can only sustain that for a certain amount of time, and it's particularly the younger players who maybe they don't see the instant result of it because they're still playing so good, so they're not looking after themselves as much, but they're still performing. But then eventually, after years and years and years of doing this, a lot of these guys have got a lot of money compared to their friends, so they might be ordering out a lot. Years and years and years is going to take a toll on your body, and it might start to have a bit of an impact on your performance. So, in my view, you should always be looking after yourself, just so you can able to, sustain your career for a longer period of time.
And this man practices what he preaches. I saw you in the gym today on Instagram getting ready for this podcast. You definitely practice what you preach there, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really putting a big emphasis into it going into this like off-season period because, like I said, I've got a lot of downtime now. Obviously, we are like preparing for next year in terms of like roster and all these sort of things. But outside of that, I'm really working on myself. I've been to the gym like 35 out of the last 40 days. I'm back running again because I had a knee injury in October, so it kind of took me out of running. I was wanting to do a half marathon this year, but I'm on my like second run back since then. I had to like go to the physio and stuff like that and work a lot on sort of recovering my left knee. But since then, like since I've started going to the gym and whatnot, my knees felt a lot better now, and I've ran uh, 2 times in the last week. But I'm doing a 10K in October that I'm sort of training for, and then the goal again is to try and do a half marathon next year, and then eventually progress on to doing a full marathon the year after that.
Nice man. This man can do it all. When players are when players are playing a Call of Duty game, especially professionally, what type of like state should they be in? Like mental state?
um, It's a hard question because I think there's a lot of different players who are in maybe different mental states. Um, I think there you've got the sort of more calm, composed type figures, and then you've got the guys who are just full of energy and kind of like shouting and screaming, and that's get what gets them going. I think it's probably similar in traditional sports too, where you have the more stoic individuals in football who are, you know, just a lot more calm when it comes down to it, and then you have the more aggressive guys who maybe have a bit more about them, but they lack in certain other areas. So for me, I'd say that it's hard to say. I think there's different, you know, all sorts of different ways of thinking about it.
You ever came across someone who has either used or applied hypnosis before? The reason I ask that is because I was speaking to actually my last guest, and a friend of mine who's a boxing coach, but he also does quite a lot of mental performance stuff. And he was talking about his son who was playing Call of Duty at quite a high level, or maybe relatively high level. And towards the end of the game or towards the end of the tournament, I can't remember the exact context, his hands were shaking and he was kind of having like some sort of like smaller tremors because of the nerves. So he put his son into like a hypnotic state, cured him of these tremors, and he went on and played really well. Have you ever seen like coaches or like sports psychologists or esports psychologists use any of those kind of hypnotic tools?
No, I've actually not, but I mean, it sounds interesting to be honest, and I'm one of those guys that is always willing to try things. So like, I mean, maybe it works to be honest with you. I've never seen it happening in like a professional sense, but I'm not doubting it could be beneficial. For me, that's a part of my whole like thought process is very much. I'm always willing to try new techniques and all these sort of things. Some things work, some things don't, and at the end of the day, you're just going to learn every time you're trying something new. So, I mean, tell him to give me a call. I'll try and hypnotize one of my players and see what happens.
Mate, if he does and you go off to win next season, I need at least 3% of the commission of the award, the reward.
If that does happen, you're gonna have to delete this podcast because I can't have any of the competition knowing about my secret techniques. We're gonna have to keep it on the down low so no one else is, stepping up their game.
Oh, I love it, man. I love it, man. When I was stalking you like a creepy ex-girlfriend and looking at all the content that I could find on you online in preparation to this podcast, I was looking at some of the marvelous and incredible stages that you've both played on and coached on. And from the outside in, I didn't realize how big the industry was. Can you perhaps bring to life, either by number of attendees at these events or perhaps by the size of the market, how big are these Call of Duty tournaments and leagues?
Yeah, at the Call of Duty League events, there's typically around, depending on the location and the venue, I'd say between 5,000 to 10,000 people in attendance. Depends on the size of the stadium and stuff like that as well. Because sometimes they're in smaller stadiums, but they're completely sold out, so they probably could fit more people in. But it's just the nature of the location. Because sometimes we're going to cities where it might be Boston or New York and all these sort of places where it's very expensive for venues. So typically they're not going to want to buy a venue that maybe they have empty seats. They would rather pay for like a smaller venue and have it completely full. You know what I mean? So I think that there's obviously quite a lot of people in attendance. It's not quite going to a football game where it's obviously that is actually for the most part going to a football game because unless you're in the top leagues and one of the top teams, you're probably getting around 10,000 to 5,000 people. So it's obviously quite a considerable amount. And it's people from all over as well. You have players and fans flying in from a multitude of different locations to these different places. So in the last year, we had events in the Call of Duty World Championship was in Las Vegas. So that was in like UNLV, which is like the Las Vegas University's basketball arena, which is like 30,000, but I think it was used in half. So it wasn't like you didn't have 30,000 people there. They had about 10 to 15,000 people there. And then you had sort of smaller scale events in the year where you had Boston, and that was in like a more small arena where it was like almost like a theater type venue. So obviously you've kind of got a wide variety of venues there. You've got actual sports stadiums being used, where you've got theaters being used. Uh, it really depends. I think it obviously in different esports as well, you have bigger crowds than that. You have games like Counter Strike and League of Legends and stuff like that, which maybe have crowds of like 20 to 30,000. So like Call of Duty in an esports sense is definitely not the number one. I think that's fair to say. Uh, when you've got sort of areas of the world like Japan, South Korea, etc., who are very big into games like League of Legends, whereas they're not really as big into those sort of games, or sorry, as big into Call of Duty, should I say, in those countries. So they've obviously got a lot more people to generate big crowds and whatnot. So I think that a big thing is obviously us continue to progress in esport. But at the end of the day, I think that we've still got a long ways to go to sort of be at the top alongside those ones.
It's amazing, man. One question I want to kind of tie on to that is maybe not a question or perhaps more of a reflection. I feel like your level of fame or type of fame is something that I'm somewhat jealous of. So, in the kind of broader, wider domain, you would walk down the street and no one would probably typically recognize you for what you do. But in your specific field within Call of Duty or esports, people definitely know who you are. So, it's nice for you to be famous and for your utility to be appreciated within a domain that you appreciate and are passionate about, opposed to, for example, my last guest who was a Love Island star, who whereby people recognize him, but they don't know why they appreciate him or they don't know why they like him. They just do because he's famous. And I feel like I would rather have your type of fame, which is like high level of fame, but in a niche field. So for me, as a podcast host, I would love to be known as a really great podcaster to those who listen to podcasts, opposed to being like, again, a Love Island star. So how have you kind of internalized and dealt with the sense of community and fandom and fame through esports?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. It's very, niche. So like, I've been noticed quite a few times in Glasgow. Don't get me wrong, but it's more so like at events and stuff like that. You have, fans coming up to you and asking you to do signatures, selfies, all those sort of things, and that happens quite a lot at events. But out in Glasgow, even like recently, I went out to Wonder Bar in Glasgow, and like two or three different guys came up to me like, "Are you Marky B?" Which is funny. Um, so like, I definitely think that there's been a bunch of that in Scotland, and I think it's still definitely big. But it's not like I'm walking down the street getting people like pulling on to me like, get off me." Nah,
Girls taking their bras off and throwing them at
yeah,
you and
all that's not happening. That's definitely not happening. But it has happened every now and then. I'd say maybe 10 times in the last
um,
couple of years, but it's not a
that's
whole lot. Like I said,
class.
you've got to be really into the actual niche. You said, so
Similarly, recently, my sister, who's 3 years younger than me, she finds my podcast so lame, mate. She cringes every time she sees me post about it or talk about it. Never listened to a single episode, but a couple of weeks ago, we're at a stand-up comedy gig, and I do stand-up comedy in my spare time. Do stand-up comedy in my spare time, and I post about it on my stories on my podcast account.
I've seen that
And I
actually.
was at a stand-up comedy gig at the O2, and the interval came on. It was like a sold out show. It was called Have a Word Podcast Live. It was actually a live podcast show, but it was a comedy podcast. And halfway through, at the interval, this kid, or not kid, like 21-year-old turned over the seat and said, "Oh, by the way, are you David McIntosh? I listened to your podcast." And his dad goes, "Yeah, he's never got it off the TV." And like we exchanged a few like words, and he turned back around. And for the first time in the 3 years I've been running this podcast, my sister just gave me a fist bump and was like, "Yeah, that's pretty awesome."
Yeah, it's definitely pretty cool if your family get to experience it. I had it happen. Um, Hopefully this doesn't offend anyone, but I'm a Celtic fan.
Me too.
And I've had it happen quite a few times at Celtic games. I was happened one time in particular with my dad, where we're walking up and two boys stopped me and were like, "Are you Marky B?" And I think like when your family around, it's a bit more cool because they're
Yeah,
like,
it's special.
"You're a big deal." Whereas I mean, it's cool. It's cool in general. Don't get me wrong, but I think it hits even better when your family are about because then they actually see like like the amount of actual people that know about it when it's
Yeah,
happening
and the
randomly and on the street.
And the impact that you've had, like, yeah, you've got these big checks coming through the door from winning tournaments and coaching, but that's just like numbers on a screen. But the fact that a young kid is looking up to you as like somewhat of an idol or someone whose content they consume or someone who they watch play live or coach live, and they have a little bit of that motivation instilled in them because you're a relatable role model. Again, the exact reason I started this podcast was to create an online directory of role models and roadmaps like that. There's something that's so much richer than any sort of check or money uh, that could be provided through competition like that. sentimental testimony in real life, there's nothing that can beat that at all.
No, 100%. And you hit the nail on the head there as well in terms of like, I think that's a big thought process of mine going into this off season is that I've even had a few DMs. That's why I've been putting a big emphasis on like health and well being. I mean, I always have, but I think I'm really going all in on it right now. And I think that that's just due to I want to set good examples for not only fans but like the other players and being able to be a coach that can like show players that like, hey, I'm doing this, like rather than telling them to do things that I'm not actually doing myself. I think that that's a lot easier to get some buy-in off people if you're actually committing to the cause rather than just do this, do this. This will make you better. Rather than actually, I've got practicing what I preach, like you said.
I love it, man. We're wrapping up the podcast now towards the end, but I want to ask you one final question. And it's probably a question that you didn't expect me to ask, and it's very left field. Given that you rose to the ranks of online gaming, online competitions, what's the best slagging that you've ever got whilst playing online?
Oh, I think the vast majority of the best ones I really couldn't say. They're probably way too offensive. Um, oh my God,
We
there's
can cut
some
it
ones
out. We
out
can
there.
cut it
If
out.
if if you go on YouTube, you can watch them. But there's one in particular, an event, not online. If you type in Marky B and Mad Cat Go At It on YouTube, you'll be able to see that. He's insulting my size. And there's a lot of strange back and forth going on. But yeah, there's definitely been quite a few different
You
ones
need to
maybe that I
tell me
haven't
what it
been
is.
caught
Come
on
on.
camera.
This
He
podcast's
was
not censored.
okay, well he was insulting my penis size. Um so yeah.
What a way
And
to wrap this podcast.
yeah, yeah, and I ended up coming back and winning when we were losing. And I just stood up and just started mumbling a bunch of nonsense, to be honest with you. Just go to I don't even know what I was saying. I can't even remember what I said at this point. It was just, it was pure comedy gold. There's some guy in the crowd who's mimicking me doing this. Uh, but funnily enough, the guy in the video, I'm actually really good friends with now. Like, actually, extremely good friends with now. So it's funny how the world works, really, when you have those rivalries and then you kind of end up going full circle and then you're friends.
Mate, I've really enjoyed this podcast. I've learned so much. I've busted so many myths I had about the esports and gaming industry. Like I said, I didn't know what I didn't know when I came out of this podcast, understanding how big the industry is, how technical the game plans are and the team makeups are, and how important well-being and mental performance is for all this stuff, and that you are truly one of the big dicks of Call of Duty, mate. What a podcast. I've really enjoyed this, man. Thank you for coming along. If I were to signpost the listeners to any of the work that you do, or perhaps your team, what's the best place for them to interact with you if
Um,
they so do want?
First of all, that was the best outro I've ever heard. And second of all, I think that you can go and check out, obviously, on Twitter, we use primarily for like Call of Duty esports, I'd say. So LA Guerillas on Twitter, if you want to find my team's social media account, it'll be the same across YouTube, TikTok, and all that stuff. Same thing with Instagram. And for my own self, you can find me on Marky B. So pretty simple. MarkyB on Twitter, Instagram, all that sort of stuff.